Dr. Akiva Gamliel Belk, Dean of Jewish Studies at the Noach Torah Institute, LLC. Welcome to Bereisheit Limood, and we're in a transition from Keturah, chapter 24, to Keturah, chapter 25. And our textbook is Gematria and Mysticism in Genesis, book 3. Dear ones, when we completed chapter 24, Abraham had sinned for Yitzhak. So we're going to back up just a little bit because we want to cover some very important ground that hasn't really been discussed. In our lives, we sometimes have challenges with our spouse, with our children, with our parents, with our aunts and uncles, grandparents, relatives. And sometimes it just doesn't turn out the way that in our heart we would like it to turn out. And it's painful and it hurts. There could be isolation and separation, and maybe never speaking to each other again. It's very unfortunate, but it happens. Now, dear ones, we're backing up all the way to Genesis chapter 21, verse 14. It's at this point in Torah that Abraham has been told by his wife Sarah, cast out his bondwoman and her son. Now, Sarah was speaking about Hagar and Ishmael. This is after Isaac was born. This is after Isaac had his Brit Milah, his circumcision. And this was after Abraham had a feast for him. We don't know necessarily the exact day, but we're saying that Ishmael was around the age of 14. And that there's an age difference between Ishmael and Yitzhak of 14 years. He was around the age of 14. And one of those days, Sarah observed that Ishmael was throwing these javelins in the direction of her son Isaac. And so, what mother wouldn't respond in such a manner? Cast this bondwoman and her son out. He will not inherit with my son Yitzhak. So it's understandable. However, if you're Hagar and if you're Ishmael, it's not so understandable. Abraham had a very tender place in his heart for his firstborn son through his wife Hagar. Hagar was given to Abraham by his wife Sarah because he lived in the land of Israel for 10 years. And the custom was after 10 years, you don't have a wife, you get divorced from your husband, or you give your husband another wife and continue living together. And so that's what she chose. Now, Yitzhak didn't follow that custom, but that's the custom then, and perhaps he learned something from that and decided not to follow that custom, seeing the hardship and the difficulty that it brought about. Now, when we return to this scene, Abraham is greatly distressed. Here he's helped to raise Ishmael. 14 years he spent in their home, and he's had this really unique relationship with Ishmael. He knows Ishmael is a little stubborn perhaps and a little bit wild, but a father that loves his children and a mother that loves her children, they tend to overlook a lot of the things that children do. And so we recognize that Abraham had a very tender spot for Ishmael. And he wasn't happy, he didn't want to do it, but the Lord, Hashem, said to him, listen to the voice of your wife Sarah. And so he took a loaf of bread, and he took a pouch of water and gave it to Hagar, and sent her and Ishmael off into the Midbar, into the desert. He could have transported them to Egypt and made sure they were well cared for. He could have bought land and made sure they had a home and a tent and servants, and he could have provided for them plenty, because Abraham was a very, very wealthy man. But yet he sent them off with a little bread and a little water, And so this is really, really challenging, because here Hagar is a convert to Judaism. When Abraham, his wife Sarah, was taken by Pharaoh when they were down in Egypt, and Pharaoh learned that Sarah was a prophetess, and she was a very holy and righteous woman. He was so impressed with Sarah and her way of conducting herself that he wanted his daughter to learn from her, to learn from Abraham. And so he said, who else could I give my daughter to that would be, better for them spiritually and mentally and in all avenues of life? And so Hagar, who was a princess of Egypt, became Sarah's servant. It would be, quite a demotion to Hagar to have all these luxuries of Egypt and all of a sudden to be a nomad, to travel with this Jewish couple, Abraham and his wife Sarah, and all of their servants and their talmidim, their students. And so she became Abram's wife, and she had a baby, it was Ishmael, and they lived 14 years, and then all of a sudden Sarah becomes pregnant. So Ishmael and Sarah and Hagar now are somewhat in competition a little bit, in a sense. Sarah made it difficult on Hagar. She made it trying her. She ran away. The angel of the Lord told her to go back to her master, to Sarah. And so we can recognize that when the three Malachim that were dressed like men came to Abraham at Pesach time, and Abraham ran to get some matzahs made by Sarah, and ran to get a calf and some milk and butter and to feed them. Can you imagine what it felt like to Hagar? Abraham didn't come into her tent and ask her to make the matzah. He went to Sarah. Why would he go to Sarah? Sarah is his wife. She has a servant. She has many servants. Why not have the servants do it? He wanted Sarah to do it. There was something special about these men that required Sarah's observance, that Sarah had to take care of this issue. So we hear Sarah laughed. Well, what do you think Hagar did? Hagar could have perhaps heard what was going on. Ishmael could have been sitting right there, right next to Abraham and these men. We don't know. But they lived in that family, in that family unit there. And so it would be hard to imagine that they weren't acquainted with what was going on. And so we see these potential bars, these potential feelings of unhappiness and anxiety and hurt and pain. And when we hear that the angels are telling Abraham that Sarah's going to have a child, can you imagine perhaps what Hagar is thinking, what Ishmael is thinking, and what this could possibly mean to their future? And sure enough, down the road, not too long, here's Hagar and Ishmael being sent out to the desert. It just seems like it could be perhaps a little challenging. I mean, look who she is, and he's just sitting around with bread and water, no servants, no camels. And so we have to just realize that wow, here's a lady who converted to Judaism. Here's a lady who was his wife. Sarah gave him Hagar, but she was his wife by Sarah's choice, and she was sent out. Now, we are in chapter 24, and Sarah has passed away. She has died, and she's buried by Abraham. And Abraham acquires a very expensive land for Sarah to rest in, the cave at Malpelah. And we recognize that the next time in Torah that we read of Ishmael, it's in Genesis chapter 22, where Eliezer and Ishmael are Abraham's attendants. And Ishmael is 51 years old, and Eliezer is perhaps considerably older. And so Abraham takes his two attendants and Yitzhak, and they travel to the land of Mount Moriah, where Moriah is at. And he says to his attendants, wait here, Gilad and I will go up, we'll offer sacrifices to the Lord, and we'll return to you later. And so what we have here is we have the son that he loved from Hagar now as one of his attendants. Something has happened during these 37 years for Ishmael to become an attendant and to sit at the feet of Abraham and to learn from Abraham. And so we recognize that Keturah, that he has strength, and that his strength has helped him to draw in his boundaries, and that deal with his issues of anger and being a bit wild, and to tame some of his ways of being ornery, you might say. And so Abraham clearly has a great deal of trust in Eliezer, and here he has a great deal of trust in Ishmael. And so what we see is that Hagar had sent her son to be with Abraham. She remained isolated. She remained away. We know the story. We discussed it in chapter on Sarah, chapter 23, where Sarah dies upon learning of the news that Abraham had offered Yitzhak. Didn't say he sacrificed him. He had offered him. He was willing to offer him. And Yitzhak was willing to be offered. It broke Sarah's heart. She had a heart attack. She died. She was buried. But then we move to chapter 25, where again Abraham takes a wife. Now, we know the story of Yaakov. Yaakov was married to Leah, Rachel, Bilhah, and Zilpah. And we know that he married Rachel, was given Leah. And I know each time that he married, one of the two daughters that he desired to marry was given a servant. And so when his loving wife, Rachel, dies in birth of Binyamin, Yitzhak, or Yaakov, he chooses Bilhah to be the wife that he is going to live with, and to be his wife who cares for Binyamin. This made Reuben very angry. Reuben was the firstborn of all the children. He was the firstborn of Yaakov and the firstborn of Leah, and so he did some things that got him in deep trouble. And so we see here that Yaakov chose the servant of his wife, Rachel, over Leah and over Zilpah. And here we see Abraham. Instead of searching for someone else, he again takes a wife. But the word again in Hebrew means, again, he took Hagar, whose name had been changed to Keturah because she isolated herself. She didn't have any relations with other men. She remained absolutely true to Abraham. She sent her son Ishmael to learn at the feet of Abraham again. He became contained, and he worked with Abraham, and he learned. And we recognize when Abraham died that the Torah says Yitzhak and Ishmael buried him, and it shows that he gave his esteem to his brother Yitzhak, that he preferred Yitzhak over himself, even though he was the elder son. And so we recognize this tremendous change in Ishmael, and that change is reflected because of the change in Keturah. And now we return to talking about our relatives. Okay? Dear ones, 37 years passed from the time Abraham sent Hagar and Ishmael off into the wilderness with a loaf of bread and a pouch of water. During this time, Hagar became a beautiful woman, a woman who was righteous and holy, and who chose on her own. She was set free. She chose on her own to observe Torah and have her son come and learn with Abraham, and to make sure that her son would follow the precepts that Abraham laid down from the Torah. And so we see that there's tremendous difference in Keturah, okay, transformation. And she became beautiful. That's what her name means. Beautiful in doing mitzvah. Beautiful in doing observances to the Lord. So, dear ones, when we look at our families and the individuals that we've had difficulty with, and we look at ourselves, we should look at ourselves somewhat in the view of Keturah. Keturah had a lot of reasons to be bitter. She had a lot of reasons to be angry. She had a lot of ammunition there, so to speak. And it would look like to those bystanders that she was mistreated. But we're not saying that she was mistreated, but it would look that way perhaps. And so we can somewhat relate to Hagar's situation from where she transformed from Hagar to Keturah. We recognize that when we have these issues with family members and with relatives, one of the measuring sticks, if you will, is to look at what has transpired. Has the individual come from Hagar to Keturah, or are essentially they the same? Has any transformation happened? Have the children taken on the attitude of Ishmael to come and be in attendance of Abraham, to give the younger brother a higher position, to accept his authority? And so we look at these things, and we can recognize that when we have issues, how we can judge them, how we can grade them, so to speak, as to whether we should try and take back relatives, try to have relationships with relatives, try to have a time where we can get together, so to speak. And so it wasn't difficult, I don't believe, for Abraham to again take Keturah because of the changes that she made. She became the most beautiful and holy and righteous woman. And so he didn't want to be insulting to his son Ishmael, who he loved very deeply. And so it was a natural transaction to go and to have. And I understand that it was Yitzhak that went and brought Keturah back to Abraham. So, dear ones, as we look at our situations in life with other individuals and with family members and all, if we grade them in the same way, and if they measure up to that righteousness and that holiness of Keturah, then that's a very positive, a very good sign. But if they remain a Hagar and a very difficult Ishmael, that's an entirely different situation. I want to thank you for joining with me.